Thank you everybody for being here. Will that cover all the thank yous? Just a quick word. I'm one of Lang's lot at City Poly. I think that's the correct title. But I'm also on the National Committee of Rural and Agricultural Workers of Unite the Union. So this is the direct descendants of the Farm Workers Union set up over 100 years ago. I'm on that national. And I'm going to finish with this, but I'll just sort of flash this up at the beginning. This time last year, the Agricultural Wages Board was abolished, and I was involved in trying to stop that abolition. But I bet most of you didn't even know it was abolished because it never got any publicity and never even got it into the Archers. And in the past, I have to confess, I managed to get John Archer bumped off. I'm sorry about that. People are very upset with you. Right. Do I do that? Yes. Okay. This I've got a few degrees in agricultural science, and during all the time I studied, I once heard about labour, and that was when we had accounting sheets and there was inputs and outputs, and the inputs were fertilisers, pesticides, and labour. There was nothing on the output side of happy workers and nice communities. You know, that didn't count. It was just labour. And while I was doing my masters, it was on tropical crops, and I found out, I think one of the most interesting facts in the world is that the main exporters of crops are grown on the other side of the world from which they originate. Just about every crop you can think of, that's the case. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of them. Where did sugar originate? Over there. Came all the way through here, arriving around Caribbean and northern Southern America in the 1500s. That became the basis of the slave trade, which we know so well. They have a variety called Creole there, identical to what you can find still in New Guinea. By the way, and that was what? Cane sugar, yeah, not beet sugar. This is cane sugar. We know it's all about slave labour. And you know the Rolling Stones record Brown Sugar, which we've all danced to just around midnight? If you listen to the words just before just around midnight, it is you can hear the bosses whipping the women just around midnight. But you didn't know that, did you? Just that's right. Anyway, if you want more of this stuff, I'm presuming everybody's going to get a copy of this. You click on that, it will throw up all the histories of all the crops. But I'll just pick up on another one because Salete was talking about Brazil. Coffee, again, other side of the world, came around, only 2 or 3 actual plants made the whole of the coffee crop in Brazil. There they imported migrant workers from Portugal, set up little plantations. There was a deal though, they set up plantations but had little plots of land of their own as well to grow food. I think that's a very useful, keep that in mind for the future. And the most famous guy to find out all this was a guy called Vavilov in Russia, and he noted where the 7 centres of crop origins are. They're still called the Vavilov centres. Vavilov, probably the greatest agricultural scientist ever, locked up by Stalin and died in prison in the war. He set up the first seed centre in Stalingrad, where apparently a dozen people died to protect the seeds against Nazis stealing them. They wouldn't eat the seeds or the tubers. They carried on starving to stop them getting them. Such is the importance of seeds. Right. Tea, there's another one. There you are. Obviously we know tea came from China, responsible for the Opium Wars, and eventually what we did was learn to grow tea in India and Sri Lanka. Just one little story there, just to show you how the role of labour is important in understanding what is grown where. It isn't do you remember I was saying about that, I was doing tropical crops. I was told these crops did this because they were escaping the pesticides and the parasites and the new land was favourable to growing. And I said, well no, this doesn't make any sense at all actually. You know, because what often happens is they go to a new area and there's new bugs which they haven't got resistance to and they get wiped out. I said, what is clear is about labour what labour conditions are, whether they can bring in labour. And this is, tea is absolutely classic. Comes from China, moved into India, Sri Lanka. Their plantations are set up, but they need people to work the plantations, so they move people from India, called Tamils, to Sri Lanka to work the plantations in Sri Lanka. When I was working with them some years back, I found out that during the 60s, Bandaranaike, do you remember the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Bandaranaike, Socialist Prime Minister? She got rid of a lot of the plantations, saying they shouldn't be dependent on one crop. Spot on. She then gave the land back to the local Sinhalese, the local people from Sri Lanka, not to the Tamils. And the Tamils said, hang on, we've been working these plantations for 4 or 5 generations, we want some of the land. No, you can't have it. Couldn't have a language either. Hence, they demanded that land, some land for themselves in the north of Sri Lanka. And hence that's all about the Tamil tigers and all that. But you don't hear that, do you? You just hear about these lunatic Tamil tigers. What is it about land? Again, land and labour. Right. Cocoa, the same, went around the world that way. It originated in the Amazon and now is grown primarily in Africa. But again, what was responsible was, you find in rubber cocoa, and it's grown in isolated patches, small farmers. That isn't what capital wants. Capital wants to set up plantations, big areas of land, you know, so it can maximise the mechanisation process. And so there's 2 elements of these plantations. You'll see why I'm going on about plantations. Is one, they're monocultures, all one grapes or one sugarcane, and they're primarily dependent on migrant workers, wherever they are. Whether it's Tamil, whether it's in the cocoa, they move people around, mainly because those big areas of land are outside urban centres, so they need to move people into them. So it's migrants and monocultures. Right, and rubber's the same. I know rubber, we don't eat much rubber, but it's the same story. Again, originated in the Amazon. A man called Wickham from Britain didn't steal, 80,000 seeds, brought them back to Kew Gardens, grew the rubber there, shipped out a few hundred plants to the east. Again, setting up plantations, 4 plants survived. The whole of the rubber crop in the east is based on 4 plants. Again, so you've got monocultures, migrants, and a very narrow gene pool. All elements. Right, here we are. So this is what they have in common. Right. Movements by people, not natural. There's a change in cultivation techniques. My professor said it was due to, there's the links if you want to find out more. Now we're looking back to where the plants came from for resistance and predators. We're going backwards, you know. What happens for potatoes? We're going back to Peru and places to find the specimens to bring. And I'd have to say, Britain and Kew are involved in a lot of this, and you have to put down the great colonies of the world. Our colonialisation has been responsible for a lot. But back to that movement of migrant workers. So I want a quick. Right, I mentioned the Sri Lankan one, and the Malaysia tapping and all that. But the role of these plantations and migrants is absolutely crucial. I mentioned the Portuguese. One of the other ones was, do you remember a few years ago, around Christmas, we suddenly had these stories of tribes macheting each other around Christmas in Kenya. That, you know, suddenly these people were killing each other. And it was presented on the British television as these 2 tribes had fallen out, you know, and they're obviously fanatic to madmen, you know, because we wouldn't do that sort of thing otherwise. When I wrote to the union guy in the area and I said, we've been told it's about 2 tribes. He said, no, it's about 3 tribes. It's about the Kikuyu, it's about Odinga's tribe, it's about the British. Yeah. Don't forget the British tribe. When in Kenya, we were fighting the Kikuyu. Do you remember when we were young towards the Kikuyu? He said, well, Kikuyu and Kenyatta own the land in Kenya. Kenyatta was the biggest landowner, and Kivuki, the president at the time, was the third biggest landowner. And what happened was they owned the plantations in the Rift Valley. Oh, blimey. They owned the plantations in the Rift Valley. Right? And the Adinga's tribe were the workers. They're the migrant workers. But in the elections, the Adinga's tribe had won democratically, so they said, right, we're winning. But Kikuyu said, no, we are the landed gentry, we have been given it by God, you can bugger off. So they started macheting each other. Right, what I want to go to, there's all the best stuff on plantation agriculture. It was written in the 60s by a guy called Courtney. There's the link, you can find it. What I want to do is, though, just quickly say, it is classically tropical, all that, but what I want to say is that has now moved to Britain. That model, the plantation model, has moved to Britain, and let's call them plantations. You were sort of half describing them over this side of the country. Why don't we call them plantations? And we're getting a distinct dichotomy in this country. On the east, plantation agriculture is dominating. On the west, it's still family farms. It's still mainly grass, with 2 or 3 workers on a farm, permanent workers, compared with the plantations on the other side of the country. The effect that that has had in the last few years is that the plantation owners got upset that they were having to pay a few pence more than the minimum wage, which was because the Agricultural Wages Board, remember that, the Agricultural Wages Board required paying 2 or 3 pence more per hour per person. That was intended to encourage people to stay on the farm. There was also encouragements to get trained, and they were rewarded for that. But of course, the plantation owners weren't interested in this one bit. They just wanted to pay as little as possible. So they lobbied the government, who obviously conceded easily, and the NFU who did. And so they got rid of the Agricultural Wages Board with no debate in Parliament. It went through without any debate. But it did go through, just to say, it did go through the Lords. And I went up to lobby Tim Farron, the chair of the Lib Dems, because his constituency is not far away, because the Lib Dems wasn't in the manifesto, and it wasn't in the coalition agreement to get rid of the AWB according to the Lib Dems. So I went up and lobbied him, and we had a mask or whatever, and got absolutely nowhere. The Lib Dems went in with the Tories and voted against it, despite the fact that some of the Lib Dems, only a few years previously, said we must keep the AWB. So DEFRA's own impact analysis states there will be a transfer of $250 million from workers to employers. Remember, Tim's starting 200 billion, 10 billion, and the workers don't get much anyway, and they're going to lose $250 million of that back to the employers. And all went through with barely saying anything. If you, again, there's a click. I've got a website called Save the Agricultural Wages Board with all the details, the debate in the House of Lords. The one little victory I did get, and I'll finish on this, was during the House of Lords debate, the Lib Dem person did stand up and quote me saying, you know, about the plantation owners and this is terrible, you know, whatever. And I also got the opposition to it signed by somebody called Baroness Trumpington. As some of you may know, she's the lady who in the Parliament, in the Lords a year or two back, gave the V sign to somebody talking, and it was published all over. So she's on If I Got News For You and all that sort of stuff. And I'd written to her several times before about various other things, and I wrote to her again on this. And she, who was the Minister of Agriculture in Thatcher's government, who hadn't got rid of the AWB, she supported maintaining the AWB. So an absolute Tory landlady supported keeping the AWB. And yet they got through because the plantation owners. So I'm saying, what is happening is this is undermining our conditions. We've tried to recruit in Thanet. We recruited 150 workers at Thanet, the plantation, and they said, we haven't got any holiday entitlement. They're not letting us go on holiday. The union, we put a lot of money into it, because it took a long time recruiting 150 people, got the holiday entitlement. Brilliant. The trouble was, when they came back from holiday, no jobs. I end on that note.